In this video, I will bring the faces of the Titanic to life, from Captain Edward Smith and his crew to the musicians and ordinary passengers. I've carefully enhanced, colorized, and animated each photograph to respectfully bring back to life those who were on board. These photos are not just memories of a tragedy, but the stories of people whose fates intertwined on that ship. Some managed to survive, while others, unfortunately, remain in the icy waters of the ocean. This is not just animation. It's an opportunity to see them up close. This is the wife of the late Jacob Astor, Madeline, who survived the Titanic disaster. She was one of the fortunate women to escape, leaving the ship in one of the last lifeboats. The Novertil brothers survived. Two young boys rescued from the icy Atlantic, unaware they had lost their father. Michel Navratil, their father, traveled under a false name to start a new life with his sons. First Officer William Murdoch died while helping passengers into lifeboats during the Titanic disaster, prioritizing others' safety over his own. Sir Cosmo Duff Gordon survived the Titanic disaster, escaping on a lifeboat with his wife. He was later criticized for allegedly not allowing more passengers to board the lifeboat. Lady Lucy Duff Gordon was a renowned British fashion designer and one of the most famous female passengers aboard the Titanic. Though she survived the disaster, her escape became shrouded in controversy. Thomas Andrews was the Irish naval architect who designed the Titanic. He tragically died in the 1912 disaster while aboard the ship's maiden voyage, heroically helping passengers evacuate. Clara and Dr. Henry Frauenthal were first-class passengers on the Titanic. Henry, an American orthopedic surgeon, and his wife Clara survived the sinking in Lifeboat 5. Charles Lightoller was the second officer of the Titanic and the most senior surviving crew member. He played a key role during the evacuation, strictly enforcing women and children first. Margaret Molly Brown was an American socialite, philanthropist, and activist who became famous as the unsinkable Molly Brown after surviving the Titanic disaster. Colonel Archibald Gracie IV was an American historian, author, and first-class passenger who survived the Titanic disaster, though the ordeal contributed to his death later that year. Isidore and Ida Strauss chose to stay together, refusing separate lifeboats. Their devotion became legend. By the way, there were at least 13 newlywed couples aboard the Titanic who were on their honeymoon. Some of them became famous due to their survival stories or tragic fates. Benjamin Guggenheim, American mining magnate, heir to the Guggenheim fortune, and one of the most chivalrous figures to perish on the Titanic. Mary Sloan was one of the few female stewardesses on the Titanic. After surviving in lifeboat number 10, she continued working on ocean liners for many years. Frederick Fleet, the lookout who famously spotted the iceberg and sounded the alarm on the Titanic, yet spent his life haunted by the disaster. Yet even amidst the chaos and despair of that night, there were those who remained faithful to duty until the very end. Not only crew members, but also 8 men whose instruments rang out across the deck in Titanic's final moments. As the only Belgian in the orchestra, Crins could have escaped. Survivors recalled him playing the waltz Songe d'automne on the boat deck until seawater literally lapped at his feet. Roger-Marie Bricout, the forgotten French cellist of the Titanic, whose tragedy continued even after the sinking. Bricout was the only French citizen to perish in the disaster. John Wesley Woodward, the cellist of the Titanic's orchestra, whose instrument may hold the ship's most haunting relic. Pianist Theodore Brailey survived war in Africa only to perish on Titanic. His diary predicted drowning, Yet he played cheerful ragtime until water silenced the keys forever. Bassist John Clark survived the 1909 collision of RMS Oceanic, only to perish on Titanic 3 years later. His instrument, too large to float, may still lie in the wreck. Violist Percy Taylor was playing Nearer My God to Thee when a wave swept him overboard. With his last breath, witnesses heard him shout, "Keep playing," in the darkness. Jock Hume, just 21, played until waves washed over the deck. Days later, his father received a bill for his ruined uniform, while still praying for his son's return. As the musician's final notes faded, the real fight for survival began. Harold Bride helped send Titanic's distress calls until seawater flooded the Marconi room. Washed overboard, he survived by clinging to an overturned lifeboat. Investigative reporter William T. Stead once wrote a story about a ship disaster caused by a lack of lifeboats. Years later, he died on Titanic, reportedly helping women and children before the end. Rhoda Abbott was the only woman to go down with the Titanic and survive. She lost both her teenage sons, but was later rescued by a lifeboat. Thomas Macaulay, Titanic's gymnastic instructor who turned the sinking ship into his final training ground. Ava Hart was just 7 years old when she survived the Titanic. She and her mother escaped in a lifeboat, but her father stayed behind and was lost. Lawrence Beasley, 1877 to 1967, survived the Titanic and later wrote a famous eyewitness account of the disaster, published just months after the sinking. The last photograph of the Titanic, taken by passenger Francis Brown on April 11, 1912 in Queenstown, just 3 days before the disaster. Noel Leslie, Countess of Rothes. While aristocrats wept, the Countess grabbed an oar and navigated Lifeboat 8 for 8 hours. As water flooded the engine room, Bell and his 35-man team worked barefoot in rising steam to maintain power, giving passengers 2 extra hours to evacuate. Not a single engineer survived. Joseph Bruce Ismay, the most controversial survivor, Titanic's managing director who faced lifelong scorn. Ismay jumped into collapsible sea as it was being lowered. Milvina Dean, the youngest Titanic survivor who became the disaster's living memory for 97 years. A 9-week-old baby wrapped in a sack when lowered into Lifeboat 10. Daniel Buckley was a young third-class passenger who survived the Titanic by climbing into a lifeboat disguised with a shawl. Phillips transmitted SOS for 2 hours as the ship sank, his last message to nearby ship Californian, "Come at once, we are sinking." They never responded. His body was never found. Sidney Clarence Stewart Collett was an English artist. He survived the Titanic disaster, escaping on Lifeboat 9. Henry Tingle Wilde, the tragic chief officer who never wanted to sail on Titanic and died trying to save others. Wilde wrote, "I still don't like this ship days before disaster." These smiles are not just about joy. They speak of relief. These people survived one of the greatest maritime disasters in history. Their expressions aren't of celebration, but of the quiet realization. They lived. Behind them, a freezing night, fear and loss, and now, solid ground and life. The tragedy of the Titanic is not just the story of a ship. It's the story of hundreds of human lives. Men, women, children. Lives cut short in the icy silence of the Atlantic. And when we look into these faces, we remember, behind every photograph was a real person. Thousands of such stories sank with the ship, but through memory and these images, a part of them still lives on.